What secrets hide in a shattered Venetian mirror? Who killed Sir Gervais Chevenix's Gore? Tyrant? Collector? Victim? Can Hercule Poirot unravel a web of betrayal before the killer strikes again? Dive into a mystery where reflections reveal murder. Settle in for a story of betrayal. Share in the comments where you're tuned in. And hit subscribe to keep the suspense alive. Chapter 1. The Auction's Sting. The Grand Hall of Sotheby's Auction House in London buzzed like a hive of cultured bees, the air thick with the scent of aged leather, polished wood, and the faint, metallic tang of anticipation. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the assembled crowd. Aristocrats in tailored suits, art dealers with hawkish eyes, and the occasional eccentric collector clutching catalogues like sacred texts. Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective with his impeccably waxed mustache and egg-shaped head, sat in the third row, his gloved hands folded neatly over a silver-topped cane. His gray cells, as he liked to call them, were already whirring, not on a case of murder or intrigue, but on Lot 47. A rare 18th-century Venetian mirror, its frame intricately carved with swirling vines and mythical beasts. The glass itself a masterpiece of silvered perfection. Poirot had come for this mirror alone. It wasn't mere vanity that drew him. No, it was the whisper of history, embedded in its reflective depths. Legends spoke of it once hanging in the palazzo of a notorious Venetian doge, capturing reflections that, some said, revealed hidden truths. Poirot, ever the rationalist, dismissed such superstitions, but he appreciated the artistry, the way light danced across its surface like secrets begging to be uncovered. As the auctioneer, a wiry man with a voice like polished brass, announced the lot, Poirot leaned forward, his dark eyes gleaming. "Bidding starts at £5,000. The auctioneer intoned, his gavel hovering like a conductor's baton. The room stirred. A paddle rose in the back. 6,000. Poirot countered smoothly with 7, his voice precise and accented, cutting through the murmurs.
Not out of passion, but to deny them to others. Poirot's moustache twitched. He raised his paddle again, 16,000. Sir Gervais countered immediately with 20, his eyes locking onto Poirot's with a gleam of challenge. The detective held his gaze, undeterred. 22. 25. The bids escalated like a duel, the auctioneer's voice rising in excitement. At 30,000, Poirot hesitated for the briefest moment, his fingers tightening on the cane. The mirror was exquisite, yes, but extravagance was not his way. With a subtle shake of his head, he lowered his paddle. "Sold to Sir Gervais Chevenix's Gore for £35,000. The gavel cracked down, sealing the fate. Applause scattered like polite rain, but Poirot felt a sting, not of loss, but of curiosity. Why had Sir Gervais bid so aggressively? The man collected modern art, abstract sculptures of twisted metal that mirrored his own unyielding nature. A delicate Venetian antique seemed out of place in his portfolio. As the crowd dispersed, Poirot rose, adjusting his Homburg hat. He navigated the throng with his characteristic mincing steps, overhearing snippets of conversation. "Chevenix's Gore's on a spree again," one dealer muttered. "Heard he's feuding with half the board at his company." Another voice chimed in. "And that estate of his, Hamborough Close, it's like a fortress." Paranoid, that one. Poirot paused near the exit, where attendants were wheeling out the sold lots. There it was, the mirror, shrouded in protective cloth but with one corner exposed, catching the light in a way that sent a prism of colours dancing across the floor. He reached out a gloved finger, tracing the carved vine. "Ah, mon ami," he murmured to himself, "you would have been a fine companion for reflection." A shadow fell over him. Sir Gervais himself, towering like a monolith, his face flushed with victory. "Detective Poirot, isn't it? The famous sleuth with the little grey cells." His voice was a gravelly baritone, laced with mockery. Up close, Poirot noted the man's
Hamborough Close. Though, he paused, his expression shifting from triumph to something sharper, more calculating. "I've heard of your talents, solving puzzles that baffle the police. Perhaps you'd care to visit my estate sometime. I have matters that might interest a man like you." Before Poirot could respond, Sir Gervais turned on his heel, barking orders at an attendant to crate the mirror carefully. The detective watched him go, intrigued by the abrupt invitation. Was it genuine, or a fleeting whim of a boastful man? Outside, the London fog clung to the streets like a shroud, gas lamps flickering in the early evening dusk. Poirot hailed a taxi, his mind replaying the encounter. As he settled into the leather seat, directing the driver to Whitehaven Mansions, a messenger boy darted through the mist, thrusting an envelope into his hand. "For Monsieur Poirot, urgent from Sir Gervais Chevenix's Gore." Poirot's eyebrows arched as he tore it open. The note was scrawled in bold, impatient script. "Poirot, your reputation precedes you. Come to Hamborough Close tomorrow. Urgent matter. Fraud suspected in my inner circle. Discretion assured. The mirror will wait for you there, if you prove worthy. GCG." He folded the note, tucking it into his pocket. Fraud? Inner circle? The sting of the auction loss faded, replaced by the thrill of a puzzle. Sir Gervais, for all his bluster, seemed a man haunted by shadows, perhaps real ones. Poirot leaned back, his mustache curving into a smile. "Ah, Hastings, my friend," he said aloud to the empty cab, imagining his absent companion. "It seems the game is afoot. And what a curious opening move." The taxi rattled on through the fog-shrouded streets, carrying Poirot toward rest. But his mind raced ahead to Hamborough Close. The mirror's reflection might yet reveal more than he bargained for, and the summons felt like the first thread in a web of deception. For now, though, the chapter of the auction closed with a satisfying click, like a lock turning in a well-oiled door, leaving just enough mystery to beckon him forward into the unknown. Chapter 2. The summons to Hamborough. The mist clung to the rolling hills of Surrey like a reluctant lover, veiling the landscape in a shroud of silver.
"Both, I suppose. The man's a brute, outbidding you on that mirror just to prove a point. And now this cryptic note, demanding your presence at Hamborough Close for some utmost urgency. It reeks of arrogance. Why not go to Scotland Yard if it's so pressing?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a subtle sign of his amusement. "Ah, but arrogance is often the mask of desperation, Hastings. Sir Gervais is a man who builds empires of steel and fortune. Yet he turns to Hercule Poirot, the little Belgian detective with the grey cells. There is more here than meets the eye. And besides," he added, with a glint in his eye, "I am curious about this estate of his. They say Hamborough Close is a monument to modern extravagance, filled with treasures that could rival the Louvre." The car crested a hill, and suddenly the estate emerged from the fog like a phantom fortress. Hamborough Close was a sprawling behemoth of Art Deco splendor, its sharp angles and geometric patterns cutting through the mist with an almost defiant precision. Towering spires of polished chrome gleamed under the weak afternoon sun, while vast windows reflected the swirling clouds like unblinking eyes. The grounds stretched out in manicured lawns, dotted with abstract sculptures that twisted like frozen flames. Sir Gervais's collection of modern art, no doubt acquired with the same ruthless flair he applied to his business dealings. As the car pulled up the gravel drive, crunching to a halt before the grand entrance, a figure emerged from the shadowed portico. She was a woman of middle age, dressed in a simple woolen skirt and blouse, her greying hair pulled into a neat bun. Her posture was erect, scholarly, with wire-rimmed spectacles perched on a sharp nose. This, Poirot deduced instantly, was Miss Susan Lingard, the historian Sir Gervais had employed to catalogue his burgeoning art trove. Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings. She greeted them with a nod, her voice measured and precise, like the ticking of a metronome. Sir Gervais is expecting you. Please, come in out of this chill. They followed her into the foyer, a cavernous space where marble floors echoed their footsteps and walls were adorned with bold, angular painting.
Turbulent. Lady Chevenix's gore, for instance, prefers the mysticism of ancient artifacts over these modern forms. And then there's the staff. Whispers of discontent, with Sir Gervais's exacting demands. Poirot's ears perked up at this. Turbulent, you say? And what form does this turbulence take, mademoiselle? Miss Lingard hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if the walls themselves might eavesdrop. Oh, nothing overt, just the usual family frictions. Ruth, his adopted daughter, chafes under his control. She's a spirited young woman with her own ambitions. And Mr. Hugo Trent, her fiancé, well, he's more of a dreamer than a doer. As for Mr. John Lake, Sir Gervais's associate, she trailed off, her lips pressing into a thin line. Perhaps it's best if Sir Gervais explains that himself. They entered a long hallway lined with mirrors, ornate frames reflecting infinite versions of themselves, creating a dizzying corridor of illusions. At the end stood a heavy oak door, behind which voices murmured in low tones. Miss Lingard knocked softly before pushing it open, revealing a study that screamed opulence. Bookshelves groaned under leather-bound tomes. A massive desk dominated the center, and behind it sat Sir Gervais Chevenix Gore himself, a bull of a man with a ruddy face and a moustache that rivaled Poirot's in thickness, though lacking its elegance. "Poirot!" Sir Gervais boomed, rising from his chair with the force of a tidal wave. "About time you showed up! And you brought your sidekick, Hastings, isn't it? Sit down, both of you. Lingard, fetch some tea or whatever these chaps drink." Miss Lingard nodded curtly and slipped out, leaving the three men alone. Sir Gervais paced like a caged lion, his heavy footsteps thudding on the Persian rug. "I'll cut to the chase, Poirot. I didn't summon you here for chit-chat or to gloat about that damned mirror, though it is a beauty, isn't it? No, I've got a rat in my ranks. John Lake, my so-called business partner. The man's cooking the book."
Perfect chance to observe him up close. Poirot's eyes narrowed, absorbing every detail. The way Sir Gervais's hands trembled slightly with suppressed rage, the flicker of something deeper in his gaze, perhaps fear masked as bluster. "Very well, monsieur. I shall observe. But tell me, is there more to this? Your note spoke of urgency. Is Mr. Lake a threat, beyond mere theft?" Sir Gervais paused, his face darkening. "Threat? Maybe. He's got his hooks in my daughter, Ruth, flirting, whispering. And my wife, Vanda. She's been acting strange, talking about spirits and curses. Nonsense, but it unsettles the house. Just get me the proof on Lake, Poirot. I'll make it worth your while." The conversation shifted to logistics. Poirot and Hastings would stay the night, attend the dinner. But as they rose to leave, Poirot's gaze caught on a hallway mirror just outside the study. It was a tall, gilded piece, its surface flawless, except for a hairline crack spidering from the edge, like a vein of ice in glass. He stopped, tracing it lightly with a gloved finger. "Curious," he murmured. "A flaw in such perfection. It is as if the house itself whispers of hidden fractures." Hastings frowned. "Just a crack, Poirot. Probably from age." "Ah, but in a house of mirrors, mon ami. Even the smallest imperfection can distort the truth. And distortions, they lead to danger. As they followed Miss Lingard to their rooms, the mist outside thickened, pressing against the windows like unseen fingers. Poirot felt a prickle at the back of his neck, a premonition that this summons was no simple fraud case, but the opening act of a far darker drama. The crack in the mirror lingered in his mind, a silent harbinger of the discord brewing within Hamborough Close's gilded walls. Chapter 3. The Tyrant's Table. The dining room at Hamborough Close was a cavernous chamber, its walls adorned with angular Art Deco panels that seemed to slice the air, never quite reached his eyes. Tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, Lake poured the wine with the grace of a sommelier, his movements precise and unhurried. Of course, Sir Gervais. Chateau Margaux, 1928. A vintage as robust as your own spirit. His voice was polished, like oiled leather. But Poirot noted the faint twitch at the corner of Lake's mouth, a telltale sign of restrained irritation. To Sir Gervais's right sat his wife, Lady Vanda Chevenix-Gore, a wisp of a woman with porcelain skin and eyes that seemed to gaze into some distant, ethereal realm. Her gown, a flowing cascade of silver silk, shimmered like moonlight on water. But her expression was vacant, her fingers idly tracing patterns on the tablecloth, as if communing with invisible spirits. She spoke little, her words drifting out like smoke from a dying fire. Opposite her was Ruth Chevenix-Gore, Sir Gervais's adopted daughter, a striking young woman with raven hair pinned in a severe chignon and lips painted a defiant crimson. Her sharp tongue was legendary in London circles, and tonight it seemed honed to a razor's edge. Beside her brooded Hugo Trent, her fiancé, a lanky fellow with tousled brown hair and a perpetual shadow of stubble. His eyes darted nervously, his hands clenched around his utensils as if they were lifelines in a storm. Miss Lingard, the reserved historian, completed the circle, her spectacles perched on the bridge of her nose as she methodically sliced her vegetables. She had excused herself earlier to catalogue a new shipment of artifacts, but now sat quietly, her demeanor as unassuming as a shadow in the corner. The meal progressed in fits and starts, the clink of cutlery punctuating the uneasy silence. Sir Gervais dominated the conversation, regaling the table with tales of his latest conquests in the art world. That Venetian mirror I snagged at the auction? Priceless! Outbid that little Belgian fellow, didn't I? What's his name? Poirot? Ha! Shows what real money can do. Poirot's mustache quivered slightly, but he responded with his customary poise. Ah, Sir Gervais, the mirror is indeed a treasure, but one must—
Hugo, who nodded weakly, his face paling under her scrutiny. Watch your tone, girl, Sir Gervais growled, his fork stabbing the air. You're lucky I tolerate that sharp mouth of yours. If not for my generosity, you'd be out on the streets. Engagement or no? Hugo cleared his throat, attempting bravado. Sir, Ruth means no disrespect. We're all just eager for a pleasant evening. But his words faltered, and he buried his gaze in his plate, the brooding intensity in his eyes deepening. Vanda stirred then, her voice a soft murmur that cut through the tension, like a whisper in a crypt. Echoes of evil. They linger in these walls. The house remembers, you know. It reflects back what we've sown. Her eyes, unfocused, settled on the chandelier, as if seeing phantoms dancing in its light. The table fell silent for a moment, the words hanging like a pall. Poirot leaned forward, intrigued. Madame, what do you mean by these echoes? Is there something in the estate that troubles you? Vanda blinked, as if returning from a trance. The mirrors, they capture more than images. They hold grudges, Monsieur Poirot. Ancient ones, from lands far older than this. She shivered, drawing her shawl tighter. Sir Gervais barked a laugh, shattering the mood. "Nonsense, Vanda. Your head's full of that Egyptian rot again. Stick to your teas and seances, and leave the real world to me." He slammed his glass down, sloshing wine onto the cloth. Ruth rolled her eyes. "Mother's right about one thing. The house does feel cursed sometimes. Especially with you lording over it like some tyrant from a bad novel." Hugo placed a hand on her arm, murmuring, "Ruth, please." But Sir Gervais's face reddened. "Insolent chit! If you think you can speak to me that way—" Miss Lingard interjected softly, her voice a calming balm. "Perhaps a change of topic. The new Matisse in the gallery is quite remarkable. Its lines evoke such precision." Poirot nodded appreciatively. "Oui, mademoiselle. Precision is everything. In art, as in life, and in deception." The conversation shifted uneasily to safer ground, but the undercurrents swirled like eddies in a river. Poirot observed it all, the way Lake's fingers host lifting a subtle weight. Hastings leaned toward Poirot. "Odd bunch, aren't they? That Lake fellow seems slick as an eel." Poirot murmured, "Indeed, mon ami. But eels can be caught, if one knows where to cast the net." Minutes ticked by. The second gong should have summoned Sir Gervais back, but it rang unanswered. Ruth frowned. Where is he? Father's never late for his own pomp and circumstance. Hugo shifted uncomfortably, probably barking orders at some poor soul on the line. Vanda's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine fear crossing her features. "The echoes. They're stirring." Lake set down his fork. "Perhaps we should check." He might have dozed off, though that's unlike him. Miss Lingard nodded. "I'll accompany you. The study is just down the hall." Unease rippled through the room like a chill draft. Poirot rose, his expression grave. "Mes amis, let us proceed together. One never knows what reflections await in the shadows." As they filed out, the chandelier's light cast elongated shadows on the walls, twisting like accusing fingers. The door to Sir Gervais's study loomed at the end of the corridor, solidly shut, with no sound emanating from within. Hastings knocked firmly. "Sir Gervais? Dinner awaits." Silence. Ruth tried the handle. Locked. "Father? Open up," Vanda whispered. "The evil. It's begun." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind racing ahead. The group exchanged glances, suspense thickening the air like fog rolling in from the Surrey moors. What lay behind that door? A simple delay, or something far more sinister? The tyrant's table had set the stage, and now the curtain was about to rise on a darker act. Chapter 4. The Shattered Reflection. The heavy oak door of Sir Gervais Chevenixgore's study groaned under the assault of shoulders and crowbars, its lock finally yielding with a sharp crack that echoed through the dimly lit hallway of Hamborough Close. Captain Hastings, his face flushed with exertion, stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. Beside him, Hercule Poirot stood motionless, his small hands clasped behind his back, his egg-shaped head tipped, his right temple oozing crimson. In his right hand, clutched loosely, was a Webley revolver, its barrel still warm. Shards of glass littered the Persian rug like fallen stars, remnants of the prized Venetian mirror that had once hung opposite the desk, now a fractured skeleton on the floor. A collective gasp rippled through the group. Lady Vanda let out a stifled sob, burying her face in her hands. "Gervais! Oh, my poor Gervais!" she whispered, her voice trembling like wind through autumn leaves. Ruth stepped forward, her sharp features hardening. "Father! This can't be. He was fine at dinner, demanding as ever." Her eyes flicked to the revolver, then away, as if it burned her. Hugo Trent, ever the brooding type, placed a protective arm around her. "We heard the shot, just after the gong, but the door was locked from inside. How—" John Lake cleared his throat, his polished charm cracking slightly. "A tragedy. Sir Gervais was under immense pressure lately. The business dealings, you know." He glanced at Poirot as if seeking alliance, but the detective's green eyes were fixed on the scene, unblinking. Poirot moved into the room with deliberate steps, his patent leather shoes avoiding the glass fragments. "Do not touch anything, mes amis. The tableau must remain as it is." He circled the desk, his mustache quivering like a sensitive antenna. The window behind the desk was latched shut, curtains undisturbed. No signs of struggle, no overturned chairs, no scattered papers beyond a few ledgers open on the desk. A half-smoked cigar lay in an ashtray, its ash undisturbed. Hastings, recovering his composure, pulled out his notebook. "I'll telephone for the police at once. Chief Inspector Japp should be in London. He can be here within the hour." "Bien?" Poirot nodded absently, kneeling beside the shattered mirror. The frame, ornate with gilded scrolls, was intact, but the glass had exploded outward in a web of cracks, pieces scattered in a peculiar arc toward the desk. The wait for Japp felt interminable. The group retreated to the drawing room, where a fire crackled fitfully in the hearth, casting long shadows that danced like accusing fingers. Lady Vanda paced, her silk man with a military bearing. "You heard the gong for dinner, yes?" "And then the shot?" Forbes nodded. "Precisely, sir. The first gong at 8, as always. Sir Gervais retired to his study afterward, said he had work. The shot came perhaps 10 minutes later. We assumed, well, he kept firearms. And no one entered or left the study?" "No, sir. The door was locked. Key inside, as we found." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Merci. That is most illuminating." By the time Chief Inspector Japp arrived, his overcoat dusted with fog, the household was a cauldron of suppressed nerves. Japp, a burly man with a no-nonsense mustache rivaling Poirot's, strode into the study, Hastings trailing behind. "Blimey, Poirot! You and your little gray cells get invited to a dinner and end up with a body? What's the story?" Poirot gestured to the desk. "Observe, mon cher Japp. Sir Gervais, shot in the temple, revolver in his hand, door locked from within, window secure. A note on the desk. Ah, yes. A suicide note, perhaps?" He pointed to a scrap of paper under the dead man's elbow, scrawled in hasty ink. "I can bear it no longer. Forgive me." Japp rubbed his chin. "Look straight forward. Pressure from business, maybe family rows. I've seen it before, tycoons cracking under their own weight. Suicide, plain as day." "Ah, but is it?" Poirot's voice was soft, almost playful. He picked up a shard of mirror with tweezers, holding it to the light. "Regardez the angle of the bullet. It enters the right temple, exits the left, but the revolver is in the right hand. For a right-handed man, as Sir Gervais was, the trajectory is awkward. Possible, yes, but unnatural. And the powder burns. They are faint, as if the gun was held at a distance." Japp frowned, leaning in. "Could have been a flinch. Nerves." Poirot shook his head. "And the mirror? Why is it shattered?" "Not by the bullet. See, no entry hole in the frame. The glass burst outward, as if struck from behind. But behind is only wall." He paced to the wall, tapping it gently. "Solid plaster, no hidden back." Poirot turned to her gently. "Madame, what did he mean by that?" She wrung her hands. "He bought it to spite you, Monsieur Poirot. But lately he stared into it for hours. Said he saw revenge in his own eyes. I begged him to destroy it." Ruth appeared behind her, voice sharp. "Mother, that's nonsense. Father wasn't superstitious. If it's not suicide, then who? We're all alibied by each other." "Alibis," Poirot mused, "are like reflections, sometimes distorted." He addressed the group now gathering. "Mesdames et messieurs, Chief Inspector Japp may call it suicide, but Hercule Poirot sees murder. The mirror has spoken, and it tells of a clever deceit. We shall uncover the truth, step by step." Japp grumbled. "All right, Poirot. You've got my curiosity, but evidence, man. Give me evidence." As the inspector began cordoning the room,
Poirot stepped aside with Hastings. "The note says, 'Forgive me.' But for what? Fraud? Betrayal? And that scorch, perhaps a second shot, muffled." His moustache twitched. "The game is afoot, my friend. And the killer? They watch us now, reflected in every eye." Chapter 5. Shadows of Motives. The air in Hamborough Close hung heavy with suspicion, as if the very walls of the opulent estate were holding their breath. Hercule Poirot, his sharp eyes darting across the room, stood in the drawing-room where the household had gathered after the grim discovery of Sir Gervase Chevenix-Gore's body. The shattered mirror in the study, the bullet through his temple, and the revolver in his hand painted a picture of suicide. Yet Poirot's instincts, honed by years of unravelling human deceit, whispered of something far darker. The scrap of paper clutched in Sir Gervase's lifeless hand, scrawled with the word "revenge," burned in Poirot's mind like a beacon. It was no mere suicide note. It was a thread in a tapestry of hidden grudges, and Poirot intended to pull it until the truth unravelled. Captain Hastings, ever loyal but perpetually a step behind, hovered near the fireplace, his candle in a draught. Poirot began with Ruth, whose defiance crackled like static. She stood by the window, arms crossed, her dark hair falling in a rebellious cascade. "Mademoiselle Ruth, you did not care for Sir Gervase, did you?" Poirot's voice was gentle, but his eyes were unrelenting. Ruth's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Care for him? He treated me like a possession, not a daughter, always controlling, always watching. He wanted me to marry Hugo to keep his precious estate in the family. But it was never about love. It was about his legacy." Her voice dripped with venom, and Hugo, standing nearby, flinched as if struck. Poirot tilted his head. "And this control, it made you angry, no? Angry enough, perhaps, to wish him harm." Ruth's eyes flashed. "I hated him, yes, but I didn't kill him. I wouldn't dirty my hands with his blood." Her words were sharp, but there was a tremor in them, a crack in her bravado that Poirot noted. Turning to Hugo, Poirot's tones softened, almost paternal. "Monsieur Trent, you are to marry Mademoiselle Ruth, yet you seem uneasy. Sir Gervase, he was your benefactor, was he not? His wealth supported your ambitions." Hugo's jaw tightened, his hands clenching at his sides. "He gave me money, yes, but it came with strings. Always strings. I owed him everything, my career, my future. If I stepped out of line, he'd cut me off without a second thought." He glanced at Ruth, his eyes pleading. "I loved Ruth, but Sir Gervase, he made it feel like a transaction." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the resentment in Hugo's voice. "And when one is so dependent, the desire for freedom can be overwhelming, n'est-ce pas?" Hugo's face reddened, but he said nothing, his silence louder than words. Poirot's attention shifted to Lady Vanda, who sat in a high-backed chair, her delicate hands twisting a lace handkerchief. Her pale blue eyes seemed to look through Poirot, as if seeing something. "A sacred place. I told him it was wrong, but he laughed. He always laughed." Poirot's interest sharpened. Egypt again. The thread of the supernatural wove through this case, though he suspected it was a distraction, a veil over human motives. He moved to Miss Lingard, who stood apart, her grey hair pulled into a severe bun, her expression unreadable. "Mademoiselle Lingard, you are a historian, a keeper of secrets, no? Sir Gervase's collection, it fascinated him. This mirror, it was special to him, was it not?" Miss Lingard's voice was measured, precise. Sir Gervase was obsessed with artifacts of power, Egyptian, Venetian, anything that spoke of dominance. The mirror was his prize, a Venetian piece with a murky history. He believed it gave him insight. She paused, her eyes flickering to the others. He was superstitious in his way. And you, mademoiselle, you knew of his business dealings. His enemies, perhaps. Poirot's question was casual, but his gaze was piercing. Miss Lingard's lips thinned. I catalogued his collection, not his grudges. But Sir Gervais was not a man who made friends. He crushed those who opposed him. Her words were clipped, and she looked away, as if shielding something. Poirot stepped back, clasping his hands behind him. The room was a chessboard, and each person a piece, their motives interlocking in ways they did not yet see. Ruth's anger, Hugo's desperation, Vanda's mysticism, Miss Lingard's restraint, all were shadows cast by the same light. Sir Gervais's domineering presence. But the word revenge suggested something deeper, older, a wound that had festered in silence. As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered by the drawing-room's fireplace, where a small Egyptian statuette stood on the mantel, a falcon-headed Horus, its eyes glinting in the firelight. Hastings joined him, his voice low. Poirot, this talk of curses and revenge, it's all so theatrical. Do you really think one of them did it? Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. Theatrical, Hastings? Oui, but of truths. The word revenge lingered in the air, a promise of revelations yet to come. Chapter 6. The Business of Deceit. The air in Hamborough Close was thick with suspicion, the kind that clung to the velvet drapes and seeped into the polished mahogany of the dining room. Hercule Poirot sat at the long table, now cleared of its fine china, his small, precise hands folded as he studied the documents John Lake had presented. The accused business associate stood at the room's edge, his polished smile unwavering, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Captain Hastings, ever the faithful shadow, hovered near Poirot, his brow furrowed as he tried to keep pace with his friend's relentless mind. "These papers, Monsieur Lake," Poirot said, tapping a manicured finger on the neatly typed ledger. "They are, how you say, trop parfait, too perfect. The numbers align like soldiers on parade, yet they lack the chaos of honest commerce." His voice was soft, almost musical, but it carried a blade's edge. Lake's smile tightened. "I assure you, Monsieur Poirot, my accounts are meticulous. Sir Gervais trusted me implicitly." "Trusted, perhaps," Poirot replied, tilting his head, "but trust is a fragile mirror, no? And mirrors, they can crack." His eyes flicked to the hallway, where the faint fracture in the grand mirror still haunted his thoughts, an omen, perhaps, of truths yet to be uncovered. Hastings coughed, breaking the tension. "What exactly are you suggesting, Poirot? That Lake's cooked the books?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of amusement or irritation. Hastings could never quite tell. "I suggest, mon ami, that we examine the heart of Sir Gervais's empire. His wealth was vast, but wealth invites vultures. Let us see if Monsieur Lake's feathers are as clean as he claims." The trio moved to Sir Gervais's study, the air still heavy with the scent of polished oak and tragedy. The shattered Venetian mirror lay in a corner, its jagged pieces glinting like accusing eyes. Poirot ignored it for now, focusing instead on the heavy ledgers stacked on the desk. Hastings, ever alert, caught the motion and darted to the glass. "Poirot! Someone's out there." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he joined Hastings, peering into the misty Surrey night. The groundskeeper, a wiry man named Tompkins, stood near the rose bushes, his lantern casting eerie shadows. He looked startled, clutching a rake as if it were a weapon. "Bonsoir, Monsieur Tompkins," Poirot called, stepping onto the terrace. "You are working late, no? Or is there another reason you linger near this window?" Tompkins shuffled, his weathered face twitching. "Just checking the ground, sir. Heard a noise is all." "A noise?" Poirot's voice was deceptively gentle. "Perhaps a gunshot?" "Before Sir Gervais was found." The groundskeeper paled, his grip tightening on the rake. I might have seen someone, sir. Near the study, round the time the gong went off. Looks like Mr. Lake, it did. Lake, who had followed them outside, bristled. "That's absurd. I was in the drawing room with Ruth and Hugo when the gong sounded." Poirot's gaze flicked between the two men, his mind a whirl of connections. "Monsieur Tompkins, you will tell me exactly what you saw. Every detail, s'il vous plaît." Tompkins hesitated, then spoke in a low rush. "It was quick, sir. A figure in a dark coat, moving fast by the window. Had Mr. Lake's build his way a-walking. I swear it." Lake's face darkened. "This is slander, I demand." "Silence!" Poirot snapped, his voice cutting through the night like a whip. "The truth, Monsieur Lake, does not care for your demands. It waits, patient, in the shadows." Back in the study, Poirot resumed his scrutiny of the ledgers, but his mind was elsewhere. The groundskeeper's words painted a troubling picture, yet Lake's alibi held. If Ruth and Hugo could be trusted, and the mirror, that shattered relic of Sir Gervais's pride, seemed to mock him from its corner. Poirot approached it, crouching to examine the frame. Its ornate silver was tarnished, but something caught his eye, a faint scratch. Not from the shattering, but deliberate, as if a tool what they permit. Hastings rubbed his temples. "But why the mirror, Poirot? Why break it at all?" Poirot paused, his finger tracing the air as if sketching an invisible diagram. "The mirror is the key, Hastings. It is not merely broken, it is a message, a symbol of deceit, perhaps, or a warning. But to whom? And by whom?" A soft creak from the hallway interrupted them. Poirot's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "We are not alone," he whispered, motioning for Hastings to follow. They crept to the door, peering into the dimly lit corridor. A faint shadow moved at the far end, vanishing around a corner. Poirot's lips curved into a grim smile. "Come, Hastings. The game grows more interesting." They followed the shadow, their footsteps muffled on the thick carpet. The corridor led to the library, where Miss Lingard, the reserved historian, stood by a bookshelf, her face pale in the lamplight. She clutched a leather-bound volume, her fingers trembling. "Mademoiselle Lingard," Poirot said softly, "you are awake at a curious hour. Might I ask what brings you here?" She started, the book slipping from her hands. I couldn't sleep. I thought to work on cataloguing Sir Gervais's collection." Poirot's eyes flicked to the book's title, Ancient Mirrors and Their Mysteries. "A fascinating choice," he said, his voice laced with meaning. "Tell me, mademoiselle, what do you know of mirrors that reflect revenge?" Miss Lingard's eyes widened, but she said nothing. The silence was deafening, a prelude to the storm Poirot knew was coming. He turned to Hastings, his voice low. "The net tightens, mon ami. Tomorrow we shall see what truths the shards of this house reveal." The chapter closed with Poirot standing before the study's broken mirror, its fractured surface catching the moonlight. He murmured, almost to himself, "The reflection hides more than it reveals," leaving the listener gripped by the puzzle's deepening layers, eager for the next revelation in this intricate dance of deceit. Chapter 7. Whispers of the Past. The heavy oak door of Hamburg smile. "They speak of history, Monsieur Poirot. Of ambition, greed, and sometimes retribution. Herspect. Her words hung in the air, sharp as the glint of the chandelier above. Poirot's eyes narrowed, catching the subtle weight in her tone. Retribution, you say? A curious choice of word for a historian. Perhaps you know more of Sir Gervais's past than you have shared. She turned to face him fully, her grey eyes cool but not unkind. Sir Gervais was a collector of more than art. He collected enemies, too. His business dealings were ruthless. There was a man, years ago, a partner named Edward Grayson. He was ruined after a deal went sour. Disgraced. He vanished. Some say he took his own life. Poirot tilted his head, his mind cataloguing the name. And this Grayson, he was close to Sir Gervais. Once, Miss Lingard replied, her voice dropping to a near whisper. They built an empire together, trading in antiquities. But Sir Gervais had a knack for cutting ties when it suited him. Grayson was left with nothing. She hesitated, then added, His daughter, I believe, still lives in London. A scholar like me. The air seemed to thicken, and Poirot's grey cells hummed with possibility. A disgraced partner, a daughter left behind, threads of motive weaving into the tapestry of murder. He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. And this daughter, does she bear her father's grudge? Miss Lingard's expression remained unreadable. I wouldn't know, monsieur. I only know the stories the artifacts tell. Their conversation was interrupted by a faint clatter from the hallway. Poirot's head snapped towards the sound, his senses sharp. A moment, he murmured, gliding towards the door. He peered into the corridor, where a silver candelabra lay askew on a side table, as if nudged by a careless hand. The house was alive with whispers, and someone was listening. Returning to the library, Poirot's gaze fell on a small display case in the corner. Inside gleamed an ankh-shaped pendant. It let a question linger, watching her closely. Before she could respond, the library door swung open, and Lady Vanda drifted in, her pale silk gown shimmering like moonlight, her eyes wide and glassy fixed on the pendant. That thing, she whispered, her voice trembling. It carries her anger. The priestess. She sees through the mirrors, Monsieur Poirot. She sees everything. Poirot turned, his expression one of polite indulgence. Madame, you speak often of these mirrors and their curses. Tell me, what do you see in them? Vanda's hands twisted together, her rings glinting. Echoes, shadows of sins. Gervais brought them into this house, his greed, his betrayals, the mirror in his study. It reflected more than his face. It showed his doom. Her voice broke and she swayed, clutching the edge of a chair. Miss Lingard moved to steady her, but Poirot raised a hand. His gaze locked on Vanda. And these sins, madame, do they include Edward Grayson? Vanda's breath caught, her eyes darting to Miss Lingard before returning to Poirot. You know of him. Gervais never spoke his name, but I heard whispers. He was wronged, terribly wronged. His shadow lingers here. Poirot's mind raced. The pieces were aligning, a wronged partner, a cursed artifact, a daughter who might seek vengeance. But the puzzle was incomplete. He needed more than whispers, he needed proof. Merci, madame, mademoiselle, he said, bowing slightly. You have given me much to consider. As he turned to leave, a faint creak echoed from the hallway, too deliberate to be the settling of an old house. Someone was watching, listening, waiting. Outside the library, Poirot paused, his eyes scanning the darkened corridor. The air was heavy, charged with secrets. He moved silently towards the study, where the shattered Venetian mirror still lay in pieces, its frame a silent witness to murder. Kneeling, he examined the carpet, his fingers brushing over a faint indentation near the desk. It was subtle, almost invisible, but to Poirot it screamed of purpose, a mark left by something heavy, perhaps a tripod or stand. Rising, he glanced at the ankh pendant, now safely in his pocket. Its weight felt like a key, unlocked,
replied, his voice low. And perhaps a father avenged. We must tread carefully, Hastings. The killer is close, and they know we are closer still. The chapter closed with the distant chime of a clock, its notes swallowed by the oppressive silence of Humbra Close. Poirot stood at the window, the moonlight casting his shadow across the floor. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked again, a whisper of movement in the dark. The truth was near, but it was cloaked in shadows, waiting for Poirot's grey cells to pierce its veil. Chapter 8. The Locked Room Riddle. The air in Humbra Close was thick with suspicion, the kind that clung to the polished mahogany walls and seeped into the crevices of the Art Deco chandeliers. Hercule Poirot stood in the centre of Sir Gervais Chevenix's gauze study, his small, precise hands clasped behind his back, his eyes darting across the scene like a hawk circling prey. The room was a puzzle, locked tight as a drum, yet it screamed of deception. Chief Inspector Japp, his face etched with skepticism, paced near the shattered remains of the Venetian mirror, its jagged edges glinting under the lamplight like a broken promise. Captain Hastings, ever loyal but perpetually baffled, hovered near the desk where Sir Gervais's body had been found, his brow furrowed as he tried to keep pace with Poirot's racing mind. "Locked door, locked window, and a bullet that makes no sense," Japp muttered, rubbing his chin. "I've seen my share of suicides, Poirot, but this one's got my head spinning. If it's murder, how the devil did the killer get in and out?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint sign of amusement. "The devil, mon ami, is in the details. And the details, they whisper to Hercule Poirot." He stepped toward the heavy oak door, its lock still intact despite being forced open the previous night. He ran a gloved finger along the frame, his eyes narrowing. "This door was locked from the inside, oui? And the key, it was found in Sir Gervais's pocket. The window too, secured with a latch that has not been tampered with." Unconvinced. "Impossible, you say? People do queer things when they're desperate. Maybe he held the gun at an odd angle." Poirot shook his head, his voice soft but firm. "No, Inspector. The bullet, it traveled straight, as if guided by a hand unseen. And the mirror?" He knelt beside the pile of glittering shards, his fingers hovering over a particularly sharp piece. "This mirror, it was not merely broken. It was struck with purpose, to obscure the truth. But what truth, I asked myself? What did it reflect that the killer wished to hide?" The room felt colder now, as if the ghost of Sir Gervais lingered, demanding answers. Hastings shivered, glancing at the window, its heavy curtains drawn tight. "But Poirot, if the killer didn't come through the door or window, and there's no secret passage, then—" "What? A ghost? Vonda's been going on about curses and echoes. You don't think—" Poirot's laugh was sharp, cutting through the tension. "A ghost, Hastings? No, I deal in facts, not phantoms. Though I admit Madame Vonda's talk of echoes of evil is suggestive. The mirror, it is the key. Its reflection, it holds the secret of this locked room." Japp snorted, kicking at a shard of glass. "You and your mirrors, Poirot. You're saying the killer used the mirror to shoot him, like some circus trick?" "Not a trick, Inspector, but a method most ingenious." Poirot stood, his movements precise, and began pacing the room, his eyes scanning every surface. He stopped at the desk where a brass paperweight gleamed dully. "Consider this. The mirror, it is large, positioned directly across from Sir Gervais. If one were to place a reflective surface, perhaps this very mirror, at a certain angle, could it not redirect the path of a bullet, or perhaps conceal the shooter's position? Hastings blinked, his mouth half open. You mean the bullet bounced off the mirror? Poirot sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. No, Hastings, not bounced, reflected, manipulated. The mirror, it is
not random, not chaotic, deliberate. The room fell silent, save for the faint ticking of a clock on the mantel. Hastings scribbled furiously, muttering, "Mirror, bullet, device." Japp, meanwhile, looked torn between admiration and frustration. "All right, Poirot. Let's say you're onto something. What's next? You going to rebuild the mirror and make it talk?" Poirot smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Not rebuild, Inspector, but reconstruct. I will recreate the scene in my mind, with the little grey cells. But first, we must test the theory." He turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, fetch me a sheet of paper and a pencil. I must sketch the angles, the positions, the reflections." As Hastings hurried to comply, Poirot stood before the broken mirror's frame, his reflection fractured in the remaining slivers of glass. "The killer. They thought to outwit Hercule Poirot," he murmured, almost to himself, "but they did not account for the mirror's truth. It echoes still, even in pieces." Hastings returned, handing Poirot the paper. The detective began sketching, his hand moving with surgical precision, mapping the room, the desk, the mirror's original position. Lines crisscrossed the page, forming a web of angles and trajectories. "Here," he said, pointing to a spot near the window. "If a small device, a mirror perhaps, or a polished surface, were placed here, it could redirect the bullet's path, making it appear as if Sir Gervais fired upon himself." Japp leaned over, squinting at the diagram. "Blimey, Poirot. That's clever. But who in this house could dream up something like that? Lake? He's slippery, but an engineer he ain't." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "That, Inspector, is what we must discover. The mind behind this crime is one of precision, of patience, and perhaps of vengeance." He folded the paper, tucking it into his pocket. "Come, mes amis. The night grows late, and the truth, it waits for no one." As they left the study, the clock struck 11, its chime echoing through the silent house. Poirot paused, his head tilted, as if— "Poirot," Hastings began, his voice low. "This business with Lake's documents, it's too neat, isn't it? Like a puzzle with all the edges filed down." To fit, Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. "Précisément, mon ami. When a man presents papers so perfect, it is not honesty we see, but artistry. And artistry, Hastings, often conceals a lie." The morning had been a whirlwind of revelations. Poirot's scrutiny of John Lake's ledgers had uncovered subtle discrepancies, numbers that aligned too well, dates that seemed rehearsed. Lake, with his polished charm and easy smile, had presented his defense with the confidence of a stage actor. But Poirot's grey cells were not so easily swayed. The groundskeeper's account of seeing Lake near the study window before the fatal shot had only deepened the mystery, like a ripple spreading across a still pond. But it was the human tangle that intrigued Poirot most. The household was a web of motives, each thread knotted with resentment, greed, or fear. He had spent the day probing, his questions sharp as a tailor's needle, stitching together fragments of truth from the guarded words of Sir Gervais's inner circle. Ruth, Chevenix's Gore, the adopted daughter, had been the first to crack under Poirot's gentle but relentless questioning. In the rose garden, Where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows, she had paced, her sharp tongue dulled by nerves. He was suffocating, she admitted, her voice bitter as the wind that stirred the petals. Father controlled everything, my life, my choices, even Hugo. I wanted out, Poirot. Is that a crime? Not a crime, mademoiselle, Poirot had replied, his eyes narrowing. But perhaps a motive. Hugo Trent, Ruth's brooding fiancé, had been less forthcoming. In the billiard room, his hands trembled as he lit a cigarette, the smoke curling like a question mark. Yes, I owed money, he confessed, avoiding Poirot's gaze. Gambling debts. Sir Gervais bailed me out, but it came with strings. Always strings. Betrayed nothing. Yet Poirot sensed a shadow behind her composure, a flicker of something unspoken when he mentioned the Venetian mirror. Sir Gervais was fascinated by its history, she had said, her voice steady. He believed it carried a weight beyond its craftsmanship. Poirot had nodded, but his mind was elsewhere, piecing together her knowledge of optics and her access to the study. The day's most startling discovery, however, came late in the afternoon, when Poirot and Hastings returned to Sir Gervais's study. The shattered mirror still lay in fragments on the floor, its silvered surface glinting like broken promises. Poirot knelt, his gloved fingers sifting through the shards, when he found it, a folded scrap of paper tucked beneath the desk. He unfolded it with care, revealing a single word scrawled in Sir Gervais's bold hand. Revenge. Hastings, Poirot murmured, holding the paper to the light. This is no idle word. It is a cry from the grave, a thread in our tangled web. The word sparked a flurry of questions. Revenge for what? Against whom? Poirot's mind raced, recalling Miss Lingard's mention of Sir Gervais's disgraced business partner, a man ruined years ago by ruthless dealings. Could the past have reached into the present, its shadow cast in blood? Or was the motive closer, woven into the fractured relationships of Hamborough Close? As evening fell, Poirot summoned the household to the drawing room, his presence commanding despite his diminutive stature. The firelight flickered, casting Ruth's defiant glare, Hugo's nervous fidgeting, and Vanda's otherworldly calm into sharp relief. Lake stood apart, his charm strained, while Miss Lingard lingered near the door, her eyes unreadable. Mes amis, Poirot began, his voice smooth as velvet. We stand in a house of secrets, where every heart hides a truth. But the truth, it is like a reflection. It cannot be hidden forever. Monsieur Lake, your documents, they are too perfect, n'est-ce pas? She's got fire enough to kill. Poirot shook his head, his grey cells humming. The motive, Hastings. It lies not in one heart, but in the tangle of many. The word revenge, it is a key, but to which lock? We must look deeper, into the shadows of this house. Outside, the Surrey night was thick with mist, the estate's windows glowing like eyes in the dark. Poirot stepped onto the terrace, the chill air sharpening his senses. A faint creak from the garden caught his ear, a footstep perhaps, or the house itself groaning under the weight of its secrets. He turned, his silhouette framed against the light, and murmured, "The truth is close, mon ami, but it is a dangerous truth." The chapter closed with Poirot's gaze fixed on the starry sky, his mind weaving the threads of motive, opportunity, and betrayal into a pattern only he could see. The web was tightening,
and the killer's reflection would soon be clear. Chapter 10. The Mirror's Trick. The rain lashed against the tall windows of Humborough Close, each droplet a tiny prism scattering the dim light of the chandeliers. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand study, his small frame dwarfed by the towering bookshelves and the jagged remains of Sir Gervase Chevenix Gore's prized Venetian mirror. Its shattered fragments glinted on the floor, a constellation of broken secrets. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and the faint metallic tang of blood, though the body had long been removed. Poirot's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, darted from the splintered frame to the desk where Sir Gervase had met his end, a bullet through his temple. Captain Hastings, ever loyal but perpetually a step behind, fidgeted near the door. "Poirot, old chap, I don't see how you're so certain this wasn't suicide." Jap's convinced, and the evidence, the revolver in his hand, the locked door, seems clear enough. Poirot's mustache twitched, a silent herald of his amusement. "Mon ami, the evidence is never what it seems when it is arranged to deceive. The revolver, oui, it was in his hand, but the hand did not fire it."
Poirot rose, his movements deliberate, like a cat stalking unseen prey. "Plain, you say? No, no, Inspector. The plain is for the unimaginative. Let us consider the impossible instead." He beckoned them to a corner of the room, where a small table held a replica mirror, one he'd had brought from London that morning. Its silvered surface gleamed, unmarred, unlike its shattered predecessor. "Observe," Poirot said, positioning the mirror at an angle. He produced a small flashlight from his pocket, its beam slicing through the dimness. He aimed it at the mirror and the light bounced, striking a brass candelabrum across the room. The reflection. It can deceive. It can make a thing appear where it is not. Now, imagine not a beam of light, but a bullet. Jap's eyes narrowed, skepticism etched into his weathered face. "A bullet? You're saying someone shot through the mirror?" "Not through, Inspector." With Poirot adjusted the mirror, his fingers precise. The killer used the mirror's reflective properties to alter the bullet's path, making it seem as though Sir Gervase shot himself. The angle of the wound, too steep for his own hand, tells us this. The mirror was positioned to create an illusion, a trick of light and death. Hastings gasped, his eyes wide. But who could manage such a thing? "It's devilishly clever." "Indeed," Poirot murmured, his voice low, almost reverent. "It requires not only cunning, but precision, a knowledge of angles, of optics, and, perhaps, a motive that burns brighter than reason." The trio fell silent as footsteps echoed in the hall. A maid, her apron slightly askew, appeared at the door, her face pale. "Mr. Poirot, sir, I remembered something. About the night Sir Gervase died." Her voice trembled, and she twisted her hands nervously. "I heard 2 shots, not 1. I thought it was my imagination, but it wasn't, was it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed, a hunter sensing the trail. "2 shots, you say? And at what time, mademoiselle?" "Just before the gong, sir. I was in the pantry, and I heard a sharp crack, then another. And the mirror." He stopped, facing the shattered frame. It was broken not by accident, but to hide its role. To obscure the truth, Chap grunted, unconvinced. "It's a stretch, Poirot. You've got no proof of this mirror trick." "Proof, Inspector, is in the details." Poirot's voice was firm, his confidence unshakable. He stepped to the desk, where a small pile of glass fragments had been collected. He sifted through them, his fingers deft, until he paused, holding up a piece no larger than a coin. "This, mes amis, is not from the Venetian mirror. Its tint is different, its edge too precise.
A second reflective surface. Perhaps a small lens was used to perfect the illusion. Hastings leaned closer, squinting. A lens? You mean there was another mirror in the room? Oui, a small one, hidden, perhaps in the frame itself or elsewhere. It was removed after the crime, but this fragment escaped the killer's notice. Poirot's eyes sparkled with triumph. The mirror's trick is unraveling, Hastings. The killer thought to outwit Poirot, but they have underestimated the power of the gray cells. The storm outside roared louder, thunder rumbling like a warning. Poirot stood before the broken mirror, his reflection fractured into a dozen pieces, each catching his piercing gaze. "The truth is in the echo," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. "And the echo, it speaks of murder." The room seemed to hold its breath, the weight of Poirot's words settling like dust. Japp shifted, his skepticism wavering. "All right, Poirot. Suppose you're right. What's next?" Poirot smiled, a predator's smile, sharp and knowing. "Next, we find the one who knows mirrors, who knows angles, who knows revenge. The net is tightening, mes amis, and the killer will not escape it." As they left the study, the shattered mirror seemed to watch them go, its broken edges glinting with secrets yet to be fully unveiled. The storm raged on, but within Hercule Poirot's mind, the clouds were parting, revealing the shape.
"Cursed, bah," he muttered to himself, his Belgian accent sharp with skepticism. The supernatural is but a mask for human malice. Yet the mention of the curse, tied to a plundered tomb from Sir Gervais's reckless youth, gnawed at him. Vonda Chevenixgore's ramblings about reflected revenge echoed in his mind, not as mystical nonsense, but as a clue to a deeper truth. Captain Hastings entered, his face flushed from the chill of the estate's unheated corridors. "Poirot, I've been poking around the servants' quarters. The maid, Elsie, swears she saw a shadow moving in the garden last night, near the study window. Could it be our killer, keeping tabs on us?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A shadow, mon ami. Shadows are cast by light, and light reveals truth. We must find what casts this one." He rose, his polished shoes clicking on the parquet floor, and gestured for Hastings to follow. "Come, we return to the study. There is something I must see." The study, still sealed as a crime scene, was a mausoleum of Sir Gervais's ego. His mahogany desk, cluttered with papers and a gaudy sphinx paperweight, dominated the room. The shattered mirror lay in a corner, its ornate frame glinting dully under the lamplight. Poirot knelt beside it, his gloved fingers tracing the jagged edges. "This mirror, Hastings, it was not broken by accident. Its destruction was a performance, a distraction from the true stage of the crime." Hastings frowned, his brow creasing. But why break it at all? If the killer wanted to stage a suicide, why draw attention to the mirror? "Précisément," Poirot said, rising with a flourish. "The mirror was not meant to hide the crime, but to obscure the method, and I suspect it was not the only reflective surface in play." He moved to the desk, his eyes darting to the sphinx paperweight. Its polished bronze surface caught the light, casting a faint glow. Poirot froze, his mind racing. "Mon Dieu, could it be?" He lifted the sphinx, turning it carefully. Beneath it, tucked into a hollowed-out compartment in the desk, was a ruby scarab, its carved surface etched with hieroglyphs. Wide and glassy. Stared at a small hand mirror she clutched tightly. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The mirror sees all. It saw Gervais's sins, and it judged him." Poirot sat across from her, his demeanor gentle but probing. "Madame,
Tell me of this mirror. You believe it holds a curse, yes? From the tomb of a priestess? Vonda's fingers tightened around the mirror. Gervais took it from a dig in Luxor, 30 years ago. The priestess's tomb was sealed, but he broke it open. The mirror was hers, a gift to Sekhmet. She cursed anyone who defiled it. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I see her in my dreams, her eyes like fire, demanding revenge. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. And this revenge, madame, who carries it out? A spirit or a hand of flesh and blood? Vonda's gaze darted away, her lips trembling. I don't know, but the mirror knows. It always knows. As they left the conservatory, Hastings whispered, She's half mad, Poirot. Do you think she's involved? Poirot shook his head. Her fear is real, but it is a fear of something or someone tangible. We must look beyond her words to what she does not say. He paused, his eyes narrowing. And we must watch Miss Lingard. Her knowledge of the mirror's history is too precise, too convenient. That night, Poirot sat alone in his guest room, the scarab on the table before him. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of settling wood. He turned the scarab over, noting a faint inscription, an eye for an eye, a reflection for a sin. His gray cells hummed, piecing together fragments of the case. The mirror, the scarab, Vonda's fear, Miss Lingard's calm expertise. Each was a thread in a tapestry of deceit. A sudden noise, a soft thud from the hallway, broke his reverie. He rose, slipping silently to the door. The corridor was dark, but a faint flicker of light danced on revenge. He paused, letting the word hang in the air. But whose revenge, mademoiselle? And for what? Miss Lingard's eyes darted to the door, but Poirot blocked her path. Do not run, mademoiselle. The truth is a mirror, and it reflects all. Chapter 12. The Second Gong. The air in Humborough Close was thick with the weight of secrets, the kind that clung to the walls like damp mist. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand library, his polished shoes sinking into the plush Persian rug, his eyes fixed on a brass candelabrum that flickered with an unsteady flame. The house, with its towering Art Deco arches and cold marble floors, seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as if it, too, were waiting for the truth to surface. The faint echo of the dinner gong still lingered in Poirot's mind, not the one that had summoned the household to Sir Gervais's final meal, but the second, peculiar sound reported by the maid, a metallic chime that preceded the fatal gunshot. Captain Hastings, ever the loyal shadow, paced near a towering bookshelf, his brow furrowed. Poirot, I don't see how a gong fits into this mess. A gunshot, a shattered mirror, a locked room, now you're chasing sounds. It's like trying to catch fog. Poirot's mustache twitched, a spark of amusement in his gray-green eyes. Mon ami, fog may obscure, but it also reveals. The second gong, it is not a sound but a signal, a deliberate act to mislead. We must find its source, for it holds the key to the killer's trick. The library door creaked open, and Miss Lingard entered, her gray hair pulled tightly into a bun, her historian's composure unshaken despite the chaos of the past days. She carried a leather-bound notebook, her notes on Sir Gervais's collection of Egyptian artifacts. Monsieur Poirot, you asked for the inventory of the study's relics. I've cross-checked every item. Nothing is missing, but... She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the notebook. There's an Ankh pendant you found. It wasn't catalogued. I can't explain it.
He kept a few in his study, though I never saw them in use. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. A clockwork device. A falling weight, perhaps, rigged to strike a surface and mimic a gong. It could explain the maid's testimony, a sound to confuse the timeline of Sir Gervaise's death, making the murder appear instantaneous when it was not. He excused Miss Lingard, who left with a curt nod, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. "Hastings," Poirot said, moving to the window overlooking the fog-shrouded garden. "We must return to the study. The answer lies there, in the debris of the crime." The study was as they'd left it, a frozen tableau of violence. Sir Gervaise's desk, strewn with papers, loomed under the shattered Venetian mirror, its jagged edges glinting in the lamplight. Chief Inspector Japp, who had joined them, leaned against the doorframe, his skepticism palpable. "Poirot, you're chasing ghosts. The man shot himself, plain as day. The locked door, the gun in his hand, why complicate it?" "Because, mon cher Japp, the simple is often the deceptive. Observe." Poirot knelt by the desk, his gloved fingers brushing the carpet. He paused, then plucked a tiny shard from the pile, holding it to the light. It was glass, but not the ornate silvered glass of the Venetian mirror. This was thinner, plainer, with a faint curve. "This, mes amis, is not from our grand mirror. It is from another reflective surface, one the killer did not wish us to find." Japp's brow creased. "Another mirror? You're saying someone lugged a second one in here?" "Not lugged, no. Concealed. Small, precise, positioned to create an illusion." Poirot rose, his voice low and intense. "The killer used this fragment, perhaps part of a pocket mirror, to redirect the bullet's path, making it appear Sir Gervais shot himself. The Venetian mirror was shattered to distract us from this smaller, crucial piece." Hastings gaped. "But how? The door was locked, the window bolted."
Room, idly rolling a cue ball across the green felt. His tailored suit was immaculate, his smile practiced. "Monsieur Poirot, still sniffing for clues? I've told you I'm no fraud. Sir Gervaise's ledgers were messy, but I didn't kill him." Poirot tilted his head, his voice soft but piercing. "And yet, monsieur, you were seen near the study window before the shot. You claim innocence, but your documents are too perfect, your manner too composed. Tell me, did you know of Sir Gervaise's automatons, or perhaps a certain Ankh pendant?" Lake's smile faltered, his hand pausing on the cue ball. "I don't know what you're implying. I was in the garden, yes, but only for a cigarette. As for pendants, I'm no collector." Poirot stepped closer, his eyes unyielding. "A man who manipulates ledgers can manipulate more, no? A small mirror, a timed device, such things require precision, not strength. You had motive, monsieur. Sir Gervais suspected your fraud. Did he confront you?" Lake's jaw tightened, but he laughed a brittle sound. "You're fishing, Poirot. I didn't kill him. Check my alibi. I was with Ruth when the gong sounded." "Indeed," Poirot said, his voice a velvet blade. "But the gong sounded twice, and the first, I suspect, was your doing." As Lake's composure wavered, Poirot turned to Hastings and Japp. "We are close, mes amis. The net tightens. Tomorrow we gather all in the hall, and the truth will reflect itself, clear as glass." Chapter 13. The Net Tightens. The air in Hamborough Close was thick with anticipation, the kind that settles like fog over a battlefield before the final charge. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, his small, meticulous frame a stark contrast to the towering portraits of Chevenix's Gore ancestors glaring down from gilded frames. The chandelier above cast fractured light across the room, mirroring the tension among the gathered suspects. The clock ticked toward midnight, each second a heartbeat in the oppressive silence.
Cutting through the silence like a scalpel, we stand at the precipice of truth. Sir Gervase Chevenix Gore did not take his own life. No, he was murdered by one among you. A collective gasp rippled through the room, though Poirot noted the flicker of guilt in more than one pair of eyes. He paced, his patent leather shoes clicking on the polished floor. The method was ingenious, a masterpiece of misdirection. The bullet, it entered Sir Gervase's temple at an angle impossible for suicide. The Venetian mirror, shattered in the study, was not the instrument of death, but a distraction, broken to obscure the true mechanism, a smaller, hidden mirror, used to redirect the fatal shot. Ruth's voice sliced through the air, sharp as a blade. "That's absurd. How could anyone rig a mirror to shoot someone? You're chasing fairy tales, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. "Mademoiselle Ruth, the fairy tale is not in the method, but in the motive. And the motive, it lies in the shadows of this house, shadows cast by greed, betrayal, and revenge." He turned to John Lake, whose charm had begun to crack like cheap porcelain. "Monsieur Lake, you were accused by Sir Gervase of fraud. Your documents, they are too perfect, no? Forged to cover your theft. But theft is not murder, and your presence near the study window before the gunshot does not make you the killer." Lake's shoulders sagged, relief mingling with fear. "I told you I didn't touch him. I took some money, yes, but I didn't kill him." Poirot nodded, his eyes sliding to Hugo Trent. "Monsieur Trent, your debts, they chained you to Sir Gervase's fortune. You needed his approval for your marriage to Mademoiselle Ruth, yet you hid your financial ruin. Did you seek to free yourself with a bullet?" Hugo's face reddened, his fists clenching. "I'm no murderer. I needed his money, not his death." Vonda's voice, soft and trembling, broke in. "It was the curse, the mirror's curse. The echoes of evil took him. I warned him." Her fingers twisted the Ankh pendant.
Disgraced business partner, driven to ruin. A partner whose name, perhaps, echoes in your own. A murmur ran through the room. Hastings leaned forward, whispering, "Poirot, are you saying?" Poirot ignored him, his eyes locked on Miss Lingard. The scrap of paper in Sir Gervase's hand, inscribed with revenge, was no idle word. It was a clue to a wound, long buried. And the tiny glass fragment I found in the study carpet, it was not from the Venetian mirror. It was from a smaller, precise lens, placed to reflect the bullet's path. Miss Lingard's composure wavered, her fingers tightening. "You have no proof," she said, but her voice carried a tremor. Poirot stepped closer, his voice low but piercing. "The proof, mademoiselle, is in the echo of your actions." The second gong, heard before the gunshot, was no accident. A rigged wait, perhaps, to mislead the timeline. And the ruby scarab, hidden in the desk, tied to the Egyptian relics Sir Gervase plundered, relics linked to your father's ruin. The room seemed to hold its breath. Ruth's eyes widened, Hugo froze, and Vanda's pendant slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. Lake stared at Miss Lingard, his polished facade crumbling. "Your father," Poirot continued, "was Sir Gervaise's partner, cast out after a scandal. You came to Hamborough Close not to catalogue art, but to exact revenge. You used your knowledge of optics to rig a small mirror, fired the shot from a concealed angle, and shattered the Venetian mirror to mask your method. The curse was your creation, a story to distract from the truth." Miss Lingard's face paled, her hands trembling. "You can't know that," she whispered, but her voice cracked like the mirror itself. Chief Inspector Japp, who had been silent, stepped forward. "That's enough, Poirot. If you're sure, we'll take her in." Poirot held up a hand. "One moment, Inspector. I will reveal all at midnight, in this very hall. The truth must be seen by all, no?" He turned, the scent of polished oak and wax, mingling with the faint musk of old secrets. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his diminutive frame commanding the space as if he were a maestro before an orchestra. His black patent leather shoes gleamed, and his moustache, meticulously waxed, quivered with purpose. Around him, the suspects sat in a semicircle of high-backed chairs, their faces a gallery of unease. Vanda, pale and trembling, her eyes darting to unseen corners. Ruth, her jaw tight, clutching Hugo's hand. Hugo, slouched, his eyes shadowed with dread. John Lake, polished but tense, his fingers drumming on his knee. And Miss Lingard, her historian's composure a thin veneer over something unreadable. Chief Inspector Japp leaned against a marble pillar, arms crossed, his skepticism a tangible weight. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, stood by Poirot's side, notepad in hand, his brow furrowed with the effort to keep up. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice low yet resonant, slicing through the silence like a blade. "Tonight, the mirror of truth will reflect what has been hidden. The death of Sir Gervais Chevenixgore was no suicide, no curse of ancient pharaohs, but a murder, calculated, precise, and born of a heart consumed by vengeance." A collective intake of breath rippled through the room. Vanda's hand flew to her throat, her ankh pendant glinting. Ruth's grip on Hugo tightened, and Lake's drumming fingers froze. Miss Lingard's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, met Poirot's without flinching. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning each face. "From the moment I arrived at Hamborough Close, I sensed the echoes of evil, as Madame Vanda so poetically described. But these were not supernatural whispers, no. They were the echoes of human resentment, of a past betrayal that festered like a wound. The shattered Venetian mirror in Sir Gervais's study was not merely a casualty of violence, it was a deliberate distraction, a stage prop in a killer's play. He paused before a small table, where a cloth Trent. The locked room is a puzzle, oui, but not unsolvable. The killer entered and exited through the door before it was locked, using a simple but ingenious device to mislead us about the time of death. You all heard the gong before the gunshot, a sound Sir Gervais himself described as heralding dinner. But it was no gong. It was a weight, rigged to fall in the study, creating a false timeline. The killer fired the shot, arranged the scene, and was among you when the body was discovered. Vanda's voice trembled, barely a whisper. "The curse, the mirror's curse, madame," Poirot said gently. "There is no curse, only human malice. The ruby scarab found in the study desk, the ankh pendant, the tales of Egyptian vengeance. These were embellishments, perhaps believed by some, but used by the killer to cloud the truth. The word revenge, written on the scrap of paper in Sir Gervais's hand, was no accident. It was a clue to the motive,
one buried deep in the past. He turned to Miss Lingard, whose composure faltered for the first time, a faint flush creeping up her neck. Mademoiselle Lingard, you are a historian, a keeper of stories. You told me of Sir Gervais's ruthless business dealings, of a disgraced partner driven to ruin years ago. What you did not say was that this partner was your father, Charles Lingard, whose life was destroyed when Sir Gervais betrayed him over a mining venture in Cairo, a venture tied to the very Egyptian artifacts that adorned this house. The room froze. Miss Lingard's lips parted, but no sound came. Ruth gasped. Her father? Lake's polished facade cracked, his eyes darting to the historian. Oui, Poirot said, his voice now a quiet thunder. You, mademoiselle, spent years cataloguing Sir Gervais's collection, each artifact a reminder of your father's disgrace. You learned of optics, of angles and reflections, through your study of ancient technologies. You devised a plan, brilliant in its simplicity. A small, concealed mirror, perhaps no larger than a book, placed on the study's bookshelf, angled to reflect the bullet you fired from the doorway. The Venetian mirror was shattered afterward, a dramatic flourish of grief and rage. He deserved it, she whispered. Then louder, he deserved it! My father died a broken man because of Gervais's greed. I waited, planned, endured his arrogance every day in this house until I could make him pay. The room erupted in murmurs. Vanda sobbed softly. Hugo stared in shock, and Lake's face drained of color. Japp stepped forward, his voice gruff. Miss Lingard, you're under arrest. She collapsed back into her chair, tears streaming down her face, her defiance crumbling. I only wanted justice, she murmured, her voice breaking. For my father, for all he lost. Poirot's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. Justice, mademoiselle, is not served by murder. The law will decide your fate. As Japp led Miss Lingard away, the hall fell silent, the weight of truth settling over the room. Hastings approached Poirot, his voice low. You knew from the start, didn't you? Poirot shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Non, mon ami. The grey cells, they work, but they need time. The mirror spoke, and I listened. Later, as the moon cast silver light over Hamborough Close, Poirot stood alone in the grand hall, gazing into the new Venetian mirror now hung in place of the shattered one. His reflection stared back, unfractured, its clarity a stark contrast to the tangled web of motives and deceit he had unraveled. Evil echoes, he murmured, adjusting his bow tie. But truth shines clear. The candles flickered out, one by one. As Poirot turned and walked into the night, the case of the dead man's mirror closed, its secrets laid bare, and justice, however imperfect, served.